Hello, everybody. I'm Amelia.
Hi, I'm Tom.
All right.
Monday with Jesus.
Monday with Jesus. That's right. And this is the story for January 2nd, which is in the calendar of the church year, the second Sunday of Christmas, after Christmas, still in the Christmas season. And it's also the first Sunday in the new year 2022, which is, I learned, is if you follow a calendar from January to December, that's called a Gregorian calendar. So that was new learning for me.
All right.
All right. All right. And the story that we have is from John 1. Tom will tell it for us.
In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God. All things came into being through him, and without him, not one thing came into being. That which came into being in him was life, and the life was the light of all people. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. Now there was a man sent from God whose name was John. He came for testimony, to bear witness to the light, so that all people might believe through him. He was not himself the light, but he came to bear witness and testify to the light. The true light that enlightens everyone was coming into the world. He was in the world, and the world was made through him, yet the world did not know him. He came to his own, and his own people did not receive him. But to everyone who did receive him, who believed in his name, he gave power to become children of God, who are born not of blood, nor of the will of flesh, nor of the will of man, but of God. And the Word became flesh and lived among us. And we have beheld his glory, glory as of a Father's only Son, full of grace and truth. This is the one of whom John testified, and he cried out, "This is he of whom I spoke when I said, after me comes one who was before me, for he was before me." From his fullness, we have all received grace upon grace. For the law came through Moses. Grace and truth came through Jesus Christ. No one has ever seen God, the only Son, who is in the bosom of the Father. He has made God known.
Thank you, Tom. All right. So this is the very beginning of the Gospel of John. And as a beginning, it's quite different than the way the other Gospels start. We've got Mark starts with Jesus's baptism, and both Matthew and Luke have stories about Jesus's birth, but this one's really different. So, what is John doing here? Why is John begin his gospel this way?
It looks as if a motive for all of them was to identify the beginning, the place where Jesus became God, where Jesus was, took this unique role of being both God and human. So with Mark, he is adopted as the Son of God at his baptism. In Luke and Matthew, he becomes the Son of God at his birth. But John is pushing it, even further. He said not only was he, incarnate at his birth, he was incarnate at the birth of all things, at the beginning of all time, the beginning of all of creation.
Yes, it's like a cosmic picture of Jesus.
Right.
Jesus isn't named here. What we hear about is the Word. Only later does that get associated with, kind of the man Jesus. So what does the Word mean?
Well, it was a philosophical concept that had its origins in Stoicism. It's reflected in Philo. Talks a lot about the Word. I think a way of thinking about it is that the Word was a building block of creation, a building block of matter, of life, and that this building block then became the origin of all things. And it's interesting in relation to the philosophy of language that John associates this with the Word, the written word, the spoken word, with language. And that in turn is related to and grows out of, has its sources in the Genesis creation story, where God creates all things by God's word in the beginning. And God said, "Let there be light." And there was light. So God speaks and it happens. So the power of the word in all its ambiguity is what is, and richness is what John is associating with Jesus.
You mentioned Genesis, which starts in the beginning, right?
Right.
Just as John does. Do you think that was intentional on John's part?
Oh, sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
And isn't word, maybe you mentioned this, isn't it in Greek, is it logos? Is that?
Yes, logos.
Yeah. Logos.
Right.
Right, okay.
Yep.
Well, another kind of interesting connection with contemporary times with this business about the beginning, that Christ was there, the Word was there at the beginning, that's where John locates his story. Is there was a article in Sunday's New York Times about a new telescope that's being, I guess, sent
Just
out.
launched last week.
What's it called?
I forget them.
Okay, well, what did you just say?
It was launched just last week.
Oh, just launched, right. And it's supposed to be powerful enough to see the beginning of the universe. Isn't that what it's claimed?
Yeah, the earliest part of the
Yeah.
earliest stars. Yeah.
Oh, so that's kind of a a scientific effort to learn about the beginnings, and John has here a spiritual effort for us to understand the beginnings
of all things.
Of all things, yeah. All right, so when we get past this initial language
Static.
around the word, right?
Yeah.
So then we have some sayings of John the Baptist. John gets inserted, and of course, in John at this point, in the Gospel of John, we don't know who's being referred to here, unless you read the other Gospels or read John. So what's John doing here, presenting this character? He's not called John the Baptist here, right? It's called John.
There was a man named John.
Yeah.
Right. Well, I think what he is doing is that there was a major movement in the first century of people who were following John the Baptist. So there was a Baptist sect that was very influential, and often these sayings about John are taken as the author of the gospel being sure that John was put in a subordinate position to Jesus. But I don't think that's the main motif behind this at all. I think rather that the author of the Gospel of John was including in his gospel the followers of John the Baptist, and that this is a movement, a move of inclusion, so that the Baptists could recognize and affirm Jesus, and that the Baptist is caught up in this Jesus movement.
Right. So the word comes to his own people who don't recognize him. Who would be the word's own people?
Well, the assumption is that this was the community of Israel, that his own people were the people of the Judeans, those who had their origins in the traditions of Israel and in the birth of Israel. So part of what happens is that he then moves from, his own people to everyone who received him. So it was no longer based on your descent, on bloodlines, on genetics, but it's based on spirit. And everyone who received him was then made a child of God, had the authority to become a child of God.
Oh, what does that mean? Yeah, what does that mean? Having the authority to become children of God.
It's often translated power. In the NRSV, it's translated as power. But the word is exousia, which is the word for authority, and also power. But what it means is that they were given the power to become children of God, who were not born of intercourse, who were not born of human processes, but who were born of God. And that it was their identity then was not dependent on who their ancestors were, but was rather tied to their accepting him, and that they then had the power, the authority to become those children, so that it includes then everyone.
Then there's a part that says the law indeed came through Moses, and I kind of thought it was, but grace and truth came through Jesus Christ. So I was kind of setting those two against each other. But when I looked more carefully at your at your counsel, there isn't a but in there. So what is the relationship?
No but.
What's the relationship between the law and grace and truth? And
well, I think that the relationship is one of addition. That there was the law that was given through Moses, and that was a primary source of the revelation, of the understanding of God and of God's purposes. But that what was revealed and became flesh in Jesus was grace and truth, which was then an additional dimension of what was revealed about God, of the things that we could know and experience about God.
there's another phrase that sounds strange and it's hard to make sense of it. God the only Son. Can you help us with that? I don't quite remember how it was you said it, but I know when I've read it, it's God the only Son.
It's a strange translation. that has become, and because it's so doctrinal. The Greek is very clear. It is the only begotten Son of God. So the phrase is monogenes theos, which means the only begotten Son of God. And so the translators of the NRSV didn't like that, or they wanted to make it even more theological.
I mean,
So
more
that it
like
would
Trinitarian.
conform to the second person of the Trinity. So God, the only Son, as a second person of the Trinity. But that's not the relationship that is identified in John. It is rather that the Son of God is close to the Father's heart, is in the bosom of the Father, and that the Son then has made God known.
Right.
But it's not this Trinitarian doctrinal phrase that has been implied in the translation.
In some ways, it seems just a little more simpler than that. It's that John is saying, if you want to know God, look to Jesus. And so, and I would say, look to what he did, look to what he said, and that's how you understand, God's nature insofar as humans can understand that, and God's will, God's concerns.
Yeah.
Does that seem valid?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, another related phrase to that I really like, that I want to is when he says that the word became flesh, and it's usually translated lived or dwelt among us. But the word there in Greek is skenao, which is the verbal form of the noun skene, which means tent or booth. And so a translation of that would be that Jesus became flesh and made his tent, made his booth among us. That Jesus camped out with us. Well, it would be a vernacular translation, but I like the feel of that. That Jesus was camping with us.
Yeah.
In the same booth, same
Yeah.
tent.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I like that too. Another beautiful phrase is grace upon grace.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Anything else you want to say about this passage that begins our new year in the Gregorian calendar?
Well, it's a good beginning for a new year, but it's about beginnings. It's about the source of things and where to go to start new things. And so the origin of all things, the place to start is the Word. So we're starting with the Word. It's a good place to start. It's a good place for new beginnings.
Yes, it is.
Like the cosmos.
Right. All right. Well, blessings on all of you as we wind up the Christmas season and look towards a new year, 2022. God be with you.
God bless.